Lu Sheng moved toward the military faction, and an eerie silence filled the air. No one spoke. Surprisingly, it was Lu Sheng who broke the quiet first. He asked if he could leave with them later. The central marshal hesitated for a moment before quickly agreeing. Of course, he could. Inside, the marshal was ecstatic. After 2 centuries of relentless effort and patience, they had finally struck cosmic gold. Just then, someone staggered toward Lu Sheng, calling his name. He turned and saw Cumberland, who seemed to struggle to find the right words. Cumberland acknowledged Lu Sheng's immense strength. There was no doubt about that. But he voiced his concern that hoarding all the energy crystals might lead to catastrophe. Not just for Lu Sheng, but potentially for the entire planet. He urged Lu Sheng to reconsider. Lu Sheng simply cast him an indifferent glance before replying. If the guide truly wanted him, then the guide should come find him personally. He reassured Cumberland that when the time came, there would be no consequences for them. Cumberland stood frozen. He opened his mouth as if to say something but ultimately held back. Still, a chilling thought crept into his mind. What was Lu Sheng really planning? Surely not. But this was the man they had all been speaking about. Meanwhile, the martial saints watched as Lu Sheng strode away, the massive energy crystals hovering beside him. In their world, strength was the ultimate authority. And at that moment, Lu Sheng no longer seemed like an ordinary man, he resembled a god. No one had ever reached such heights before, and no one knew if it would ever happen again. Hours later, the military was prepared. Fighter jets and transport planes were lined up, ready for departure. Then, a voice called out from behind. Lu Sheng turned and saw Fiona running toward him. She hesitated a few steps away, then finally spoke, revealing something that had clearly been on her mind. She wanted to know his real name, the one he had never shared with her. Lu Sheng was silent for a moment before giving a faint smile. He told her it didn't matter. It was better if she forgot about him. Then, as if to leave no room for doubt, he added that he already had a fiancée. Without another word, he turned and boarded the plane. The hatch sealed shut. Fiona stood motionless, her eyes locked on the sky as the fleet ascended. A single tear slipped down her cheek. At some point, Cumberland had stepped up beside her. He tried to console her, telling her it was best to forget him. They were never meant to be. Fiona didn't respond right away. But then, with newfound determination, she turned to her father and declared that she knew what she had to do. Without another glance, she walked away. Cumberland called after her, but she didn't stop. He could only sigh. Meanwhile, the remaining martial saints gathered, exchanging uneasy glances. One of them pointed out that they had no energy crystals. What should they do now? Cumberland clenched his jaw, let out a bitter scoff, and said there was only one option left. They had to wait for the guide, and let the so-called peak of humanity learn what it meant to defy the rules. The room fell silent. Yet, the mere mention of the guide sent a shiver through them, a blend of admiration and fear. One by one, they convinced themselves that the guide would surely intervene, that he would be the one to put Lu Sheng in his place. The guide would restore balance. Cumberland remained quiet, lost in thought. No one escapes the guide's grasp. On the other side of the world, in the Eastern Military District, life was much calmer. At the family estate, warmth filled the air as everyone gathered in the kitchen, making dumplings together. Mom and Dad wore aprons, moving busily about. Little sister helped too, though half of her effort went into complaining. Kingsu walked in with a tray of drinks, offering them to the family, saying they'd all worked hard. The room instantly brightened at the sight of her. Little sister stretched and muttered that if Mom wanted dumplings, she could have just asked the head chef to make them. Why go through all this trouble? The chef's cooking was way better anyway. But Dad dismissed the idea with a wave. No matter how skilled a chef was, nothing could compare to Mom's homemade food. To him, her cooking was unbeatable. Little sister didn't buy it, but Mom blushed a little, brushing it off. She admitted it had been a while since she last cooked, but she wanted her son to have a proper home-cooked meal when he finally returned. She joked that she might be out of practice, worrying the food wouldn't taste as good. Dad teased her about it, while little sister rolled her eyes at their playful banter. Then, with a more serious tone, she turned to Kingsu and asked, "When's Big Bro coming back? It's been over a year." That quiet question made both parents pause. They, too, turned to Kingsu, their eyes filled with hope. Kingsu glanced at the window, unsure of what to say. She was just about to admit she didn't know when her phone suddenly buzzed over and over again. She grabbed it, checked the message, and in an instant she bolted for the door. The others hurried after her. Outside, her breath hitched as she took in the sight before her. A large crowd had gathered at the front gate. And at the center of it all, draped in a general's cloak, was Shang. He smiled. "I'm home." Kingsu ran straight to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. Through quiet, tearful words, she confessed that she had waited so long. Shang held her close, his voice gentle. "I know. It hasn't been easy." Then, looking at the rest of his family, he smiled again. "I'm back." Dad beamed with pride, while Mom's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Even little sister couldn't hold back her emotions. Mom kept repeating, "As long as you're back." Little sister, trying to mask her own tears, half laughed and scolded him for taking so long. She demanded to know where her present was. Before long, Shang was sitting with them, sleeves rolled up, helping make dumplings just like old times. Later that night, they all gathered in the living room, sharing a heartfelt reunion meal. Shang sat quietly for a moment, watching them, and a sense of clarity washed over him. If he was a sword capable of cutting through the world, then his home was his sheath. After dinner, beneath the tranquil night sky, Shang and Kingsu strolled through the villa garden, their fingers intertwined as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Shang reminisced about the first time they met. Funny enough, it had been around this same time of year. Kingsu gave a soft nod, no words were needed. He pulled her into a gentle embrace. Then, in a low voice, he told her that in a few days she should take Mom and Dad back to White Lake City. And once he had settled everything, it would be time for him to meet her family. His voice lowered even more. "It's time we make things official." A faint blush crept across Kingsu's cheeks, and she nodded silently. Then, slowly, they kissed. At the military conference hall, the atmosphere was charged with energy. Every top-ranking officer was in attendance, their eyes fixed on the giant screen playing footage from Shang's battle on Thousand Saints Island. The tension in the room was electric. Then, the central marshal rose from his seat, his expression solemn but his eyes alight with conviction. He declared that this day would be marked in history. After 200 years, their dream had become a reality. But there was more. Shang had given him a final instruction, one that shocked the entire room. He had ordered the introduction of a new body refinement technique across the military. The other marshals were stunned. None of them had heard of this. And if Shang was the one pushing for it, what kind of monstrous technique could it be?